On the morning of November 12, 1923, at precisely 6:15 a.m., Margaret Campbell stood in the third-floor landing of 47 Crown Street, Gorbals, holding 2 empty zinc pails and listening for the distinctive groan of pipes that would signal her building's water hour had begun. 34 years old, mother of 4, resident of Glasgow's most densely packed tenement district. Around her, 240 other residents in the same 5-story sandstone block waited in similar positions, some in nightclothes, some already dressed for the shipyards and textile mills. The system was precise. Stairwell A received water from 6 to 7 a.m., Stairwell B from 7 to 8 a.m. Time equals 400 milliseconds / Stairwell C from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock a.m. Miss your hour and your family went without. The tenements of Glasgow between 1870 and 1965 housed the majority of the city's working population in conditions that would define urban poverty for 3 generations. The buildings themselves were architectural marvels, blonde and red sandstone structures 4 to 6 stories high, built to last centuries. But the infrastructure inside those stone walls told a different story. Water pressure in the city's mains could not reach beyond the 2nd floor in most districts. The solution was not to upgrade the system. The solution was to ration access, by time and location. Margaret had lived in Crown Street for 9 years. She knew the rhythm. First came the distant clank of the valve opening at the street-level cistern. Then the shudder of pipes filling with pressure. Then the bang and rattle as water forced air pockets through corroded iron. The sound traveled up the building like a slow wave. Ground floor taps sputtered first, then 1st floor, then 2nd. By the time water reached the 3rd floor with enough pressure to fill a pail, 7 minutes had usually passed. That left 53 minutes to collect everything her household needed for cooking, washing. Time equals 250 milliseconds drinking, and cleaning until the next day's hour. She was not alone in the stairwell. Mrs. Donnelly, from the flat opposite, had positioned herself at the shared tap on the landing. Mr. Patterson, from the floor above, waited with a tin bath he'd dragged back to his rooms once filled. The children from the ground floor, the McGregor twins, both 7 years old, clutched milk bottles they'd fill for their mother, who was bedridden after her 5th childbirth. No one spoke. Speaking wasted time. The water system in Glasgow's tenements was never designed for the density it served. The buildings went up fast during the industrial boom, 1870 to 1910, saw tenement construction accelerate to houseworkers flooding in from the Highlands and Ireland. Shipyards along the Clyde employed 90,000 men at peak production. Cotton mills, engineering works, locomotive factories. The population of Glasgow swelled from 395,000 in 1871 to 784,000 by 1911. Tenements absorbed them all. 4 families per floor, 5 floors per building, 20 families sharing 1 stairwell, 1 outdoor toilet, 1 water tap. The city's water came from Loch Katrine, 34 miles north. Opened in 1859, the system could deliver 50 million gallons per day by gravity alone. No pumping required. Engineering triumph. But the pipes entering individual tenements were 2-inch diameter iron, and pressure dropped catastrophically as height increased. A ground floor tap might deliver 4 gallons per minute. A 3rd floor tap delivered 1.5 gallons per minute. A 5th floor tap often delivered nothing but air and rust flakes. So the landlords, property factors, and city housing authorities implemented the staggered system. Each stairwell in each tenement block received designated hours. The valve controlling each building's supply opened and closed on schedule. Residents organized their entire lives around those hours. Factory shifts were chosen based on whether they conflicted with water access. Laundry day was determined not by weather, but by whether you could fill a washtub. Illness became dangerous not because of the disease, but because you couldn't get water to clean soiled bedding outside your designated time. Margaret's building was relatively fortunate. Stairwell A had 6 to 7 a.m. Morning hours. Most adults could adjust. But 2 blocks south, the tenement at 112 Crown Street had Stairwell D scheduled from 11 p.m. to midnight. Night shift workers missed it entirely. Children had to be woken to haul water in darkness. Elderly residents who couldn't manage stairs after dark went without. At 6:18 a.m., the pipes in Margaret's stairwell finally achieved full pressure. Mrs. Donnelly's pail began filling with a harsh metallic rush. The water came out brown for the first 30 seconds, rust and sediment from the overnight stagnation. Everyone waited. No one wasted pail space on brown water. By 6:19, it ran clearer. Still not clean. Small particles of corrosion floated in it, and it smelled faintly of iron and old metal. But it was water. Margaret moved to the tap as soon as Mrs. Donnelly stepped aside with her first pail full. She filled her 2 zinc buckets, 12 pounds each, when full, 24 pounds total to carry up 1 flight of stairs to her flat. This was the first trip of 4 she'd need to make. 96 pounds of water hauled before 7 a.m., while also waking her children, preparing breakfast, and getting her husband out the door to his shift at Fairfield Shipyard. The water had to serve multiple purposes. First pail, drinking and cooking. This water she'd boil regardless of appearance. Second pail, washing dishes and cleaning surfaces. Third pail, personal washing, faces, hands, basic hygiene. Fourth pail, laundry and floor scrubbing. Every drop was allocated, nothing wasted. Bath water from Saturday night would be used Sunday morning to scrub floors. Water from washing vegetables went into the pail for cleaning rags. The hierarchy of water use was absolute and understood by every tenement resident. By 6:35 a.m., the landing was crowded. 8 residents from various floors now queued for the single tap. Mr. Patterson had filled his tin bath, 180 pounds of water, and was attempting to drag it across the landing without sloshing. He'd heat it later using the coal-burning range in his kitchen, 1 pail at a time, for his family's weekly bath. The McGregor twins had filled their bottles and disappeared down the stairs, careful not to spill. Their mother needed water for the baby, and there was no time for second trips. Margaret made her second trip at 6:42 a.m. 2 more pails. Her shoulders ached from the weight. She was used to it. Every woman in the tenement was used to it. The physical labor of water collection alone burned an estimated 400 calories per day for an average household. Women developed distinctive shoulder and back muscle patterns from years of hauling. Physicians in Glasgow during the 1920s noted high rates of chronic back strain and joint problems among tenement women, directly attributed to water carrying. The system created its own social dynamics. Position in the queue mattered. Elderly residents often received priority. They moved slower, needed help. Pregnant women were given space. But disputes erupted regularly. Someone taking too long. Someone filling containers beyond reasonable household need. Someone showing up drunk and making a mess. The close quarters and time pressure turned the landing into a pressure cooker of neighborhood tension. At 6:51 a.m., the water pressure began dropping. It always happened in the final minutes. As ground floor residents finished their collection, as the cistern emptied, pressure fell. What had been a strong flow at 6:20 became a weak trickle by 6:52. Margaret was on her 3rd trip. Her pails took twice as long to fill. She watched the minutes. At 6:58, the flow was barely more than a drip. At 6:59, it stopped entirely. At 7 a.m., the valve at street level closed. Silence in the stairwell. Mrs. Campbell from the fourth floor arrived at 7:01 a.m., pails in hand, face stricken. She'd overslept. Her husband worked night shift, and she'd stayed up late mending clothes by candlelight. Now her family had no water until tomorrow morning. No exceptions, no emergency provisions. The system was absolute. Margaret had collected 3 of her planned 4 pails, 36 pounds instead of 48. She'd make it work. She always made it work, but it meant diluting the soup thinner, wiping faces with damp rags instead of proper washing, reusing dishwater one more time than was sanitary. The mathematics of scarcity governed every decision. The health consequences of the staggered water system were catastrophic and well documented. Glasgow's infant mortality rate in 1923 was 114 deaths per 1,000 live births, among the highest in Britain. Typhoid outbreaks were regular. Dysentery was endemic. Tuberculosis spread through tenements like fire through dry timber. The inability to maintain basic hygiene, to wash hands properly, to clean food preparation surfaces, to launder bedding frequently, created disease conditions that would have been preventable, with adequate water access. City health inspectors understood the problem. Medical officers filed reports. The Glasgow Corporation received detailed documentation of the system's failures. But infrastructure improvements were expensive. Replacing the 2-inch supply pipes with 4-inch pipes would have required tearing into walls of occupied buildings. Installing pumps to boost pressure to upper floors required electrical systems most tenements lacked. Upgrading the entire network for the Gorbals alone was estimated at £180,000 in 1925. Money the city did not have and would not allocate. So the staggered hours continued, and residents adapted in ways both ingenious and desperate. Some families in fifth-floor flats hired children from ground-floor flats to haul water up during their stairwells hour in exchange for pennies. Water merchants appeared, men with hand carts and large containers who sold water by the bucket, collected during their own building's hours, and resold at markup to those who'd missed theirs. Black market water. It cost 3 pence for 4 gallons. For families already living on 22 shillings a week, it was an impossible expense. Others stole water. Late at night, residents would sneak to taps in other stairwells, hoping to access water during hours not assigned to them. This required knowing which valves were poorly maintained, which had leaks that allowed minimal flow even when officially closed. Nighttime water theft was common enough that some buildings stationed volunteers to guard their taps after hours. Fights broke out. In January 1924, a man named Thomas Reed was arrested for assault after beating a neighbor he'd caught stealing water from Stairwell B during Stairwell C's designated hour. The case went to court. Reed was fined 10 shillings. Margaret's day continued with rigid efficiency. Breakfast was porridge made with the first pail's water, boiled to kill whatever bacteria remained. Her husband, John, left at 7:15 for Fairfield. Her children, ages 11, 9, 6, and 3, prepared for school. The older 2 knew to wash their faces sparingly. The younger 2 needed reminding. She rationed the water carefully. 1 cup per child for face washing, 1 cup for her own use, the rest saved. By 8:30 a.m., she'd begun laundry. Monday was wash day for her household, as it was for most tenement families, the rhythm dictated by weekend water collection and the hope of drying clothes before the next rain. She used the 4th pail's water, now mixed with shaved soap and heated in a large pot on the range. The clothes went in batch by batch, undergarments first, then shirts and blouses, then trousers and skirts. The dirtiest items last. Each batch dirtied the water further, but she had no choice. Rinsing was minimal, a quick dunk in a smaller basin of marginally cleaner water she'd reserved. Wringing was done by hand until her knuckles ached. The wet laundry went to the drying green behind the tenement. a shared courtyard surrounded by buildings on four sides, crisscrossed with clotheslines. On Monday mornings, the green was a forest of damp fabric. Sheets, shirts, children's clothes, workmen's overalls. Everything hung in the cold November air, competing for space and hoping for enough wind to dry before nightfall. Margaret pinned her family's washing and returned upstairs to scrub floors with water that had already washed clothes and would next be dumped into the shared outdoor toilet to help flush waste. By 1930, Glasgow's tenement population had peaked at approximately 700,000 residents living in such conditions. The city's housing crisis was internationally recognized. Sociological studies documented the water system, the overcrowding, the disease rates. Reform advocates pushed for change. The Labour Party made tenement conditions a central campaign issue, but change came slowly. First significant improvements began in the late 1930s, driven not by humanitarian concern, but by economic calculation. Slum clearance became municipal policy. Older tenements were demolished. New housing estates were built on the city's periphery: Knightswood, Moss Park, Carntine. These estates had modern plumbing, indoor toilets, hot water, continuous water pressure. Families were relocated in waves, but the process was gradual and incomplete. World War II halted most construction. Tenements endured. Margaret Campbell and hundreds of thousands like her continued collecting water by the hour through the war years. Rationing added new pressures, but the fundamental routine remained unchanged. In 1943, her building's Stairwell A hours were shifted to 5:30 to 6:30 a.m. to accommodate increased shipyard shift work. She adjusted. Everyone adjusted. The post-war period finally brought systematic change. The Housing Act of 1946 provided funding for large-scale demolition and rebuilding. Glasgow Corporation embarked on the most ambitious slum clearance program in British history. Between 1950 and 1975, over 150,000 tenement dwellings were demolished. High-rise tower blocks replaced them, controversial, often poorly built, but equipped with modern plumbing and continuous water supply. Margaret moved to a new flat in Drumchapel in 1957 at age 68. For the first time in her adult life, she turned a tap and water flowed without restriction. No schedule, no quota, no hauling pails upstairs. She cried the first time she filled a kettle without checking the clock. The last tenements operating on staggered water hours were disconnected from the old system in 1965. By then, most had already been emptied pending demolition. A few holdouts remained, elderly residents who refused relocation, who preferred familiar hardship to unfamiliar modernity. But the infrastructure itself was retired. The valves were removed. The schedule was abolished. Today, the remaining Glasgow tenements, those preserved and renovated, have modern plumbing indistinguishable from any contemporary building. The landing taps are gone. The communal outdoor toilets are gone. The evidence of the old system exists only in architectural traces: the capped pipe outlets on stairwell landings, the filled-in recesses where cisterns once stood, the unusually thick walls that once housed inadequate iron pipes. The lived experience of those decades has faded from a public memory. Few Glaswegians under 60 remember the staggered hours. Fewer still remember the physical weight of carrying household water. But for the generation who lived it, Margaret Campbell's generation, the memory was visceral, the ache in shoulders, the mathematics of rationing, the fear of missing your hour, the way water shaped every decision, every routine, every possibility. Glasgow's tenement water crisis was not unique. Similar systems operated in Edinburgh, Liverpool, Manchester, and Dublin. Urban poverty in industrialized Britain manifested in countless ways, and inadequate water infrastructure was among the most fundamental. But Glasgow's system was perhaps the most rigidly structured, the most precisely scheduled, the most thoroughly documented in its brutality. Margaret Campbell died in 1971, age 82. She never adjusted to the abundance of water in her modern flat. She hoarded containers. She reused water compulsively. She rose at 6 a.m. every morning for years after moving, old rhythms impossible to break. Her children remembered her turning off taps with an urgency that seemed excessive, unnecessary. But she had lived differently. She had known scarcity in a way they never would. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about working-class resilience in Britain's industrial heartland. Real people, real hardship. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if your family lived through similar conditions. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. Time equals 350 milliseconds / greater than. And thank you for making sure Margaret Campbell doesn't disappear into silence. These women deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.